The Young and the Restless spoilers Fridays full November 21, 2025. In the shifting emotional landscape of Genoa City, the days ahead would unfold with a quiet but dangerous tension, each character carrying their own private storms into a web of misunderstandings, confrontations, and choices that would ripple far beyond the moment they were made. For Lily Winters, the weight of responsibility had never been something she shied away from, but watching Holden Novak linger around her world with increasing boldness had finally pushed her toward a decision she had resisted acknowledging. She had spent years rebuilding her life after heartbreak, betrayal, and corporate warfare, and her tolerance for unpredictable men had reached its limit. The idea of telling Holden to leave town had grown in her chest like a sharp stone. Inevitable, painful, but necessary. She convinced herself it was for the greater good, that removing him from the equation would protect not only her but the people she cared about, especially as Holden had a talent for stepping into places, relationships, and vulnerabilities where he did not belong. She had seen the signs, the glances, the shifts in energy whenever his name came up, especially around Claire, and Lily refused to let another chaotic male presence unravel the fragile piece she was trying to hold together. What she didn't anticipate was how quickly her decision would intersect with a completely different crisis, one wrapped in suspicion, jealousy, and buried resentment. Phyllis Summers, always a woman of sharp instincts and sharper accusations, had sensed something off long before she voiced her questions. Kane Ashby had drifted back into her orbit with a mixture of charm and danger that she never fully trusted, yet somehow always entertained. So when she cornered him and demanded to know whether he had slept with her simply to get access to her laptop, her voice carried that old familiar tone, half outrage, half dare. As if testing the limits of what he might confess. Kane had been unpredictable in the past, capable of both earnest loyalty and reckless choices, and the thought that he might have manipulated her intimacy for his own gain triggered every alarm bell Phyllis possessed. But beneath her fiery words was a vulnerable truth. She hated knowing that she still cared enough to wonder. Meanwhile, on the outskirts of town, Claire Grace found herself standing in the quiet serenity of the Newman Ranch, surrounded by the kind of calm she had never been able to fully trust. Nikki Newman welcomed her with warmth, concern disguised under elegance, and asked the inevitable questions about whether Claire missed the glamorous lights of Hollywood, hinting gently at the life she might have chosen had things turned out differently. But Claire, always half in shadow and half seeking escape, admitted she wasn't sure she missed that world at all. The conversation shifted to the topic Nikki was far more invested in, Claire's relationship with Kyle Abbott. Nikki, who had seen generations of Newmans and Abbotts rise and fall in love, sensed the hesitancy in her granddaughter's posture. Claire confessed that she wasn't ready for anything serious, that the idea of committing herself again felt too heavy, too vulnerable, especially after a lifetime of attachments that had turned toxic, controlling, or dangerous. Nikki encouraged her to take her time, rare advice from a woman who had once lived her own life at the speed of scandal, but Claire's eyes lingered on the phone buzzing in her hand, revealing the real reason behind her detachment. The message was from Holden, and the smile that crossed Claire's face carried an innocence Nikki had not seen in her for years. Claire shrugged lightly, telling her grandmother that Holden was fun, uncomplicated, and exactly what she needed for now, a distraction, a connection with no strings. Nikki tried to support the sentiment, but she also knew Claire carried a dangerous vulnerability, the kind that made her susceptible to men who promised freedom only to bring chaos. Claire insisted that every time she grew close to someone, another person, another rival, another manipulator, found a way to wedge themselves between her and any chance at happiness. Before Nikki could respond, Claire added that she suspected Audra was already circling, just like she always did. At the mere mention of Audra Charles, Nikki felt a familiar chill. Audra had become a disruptor in nearly every romantic equation she touched, and the thought of her inserting herself into Claire's emotional life made Nikki increasingly protective. Back in Genoa City proper, the atmosphere at society shifted the moment Lily walked in. She expected a quiet evening, maybe a moment to gather herself before confronting Holden, but instead she spotted Kane and Phyllis sitting far too comfortably together. The scene stopped her in her tracks. Kane with that relaxed posture he used to have only around her, and Phyllis with a gleam in her eye that suggested she had already claimed a territory Lily didn't realize she had left exposed. When she approached them, her voice carried an undertone she hadn't intended, curiosity edged with the sting of betrayal. She asked what they were doing there, and Kane casually explained that he was having a drink before going upstairs to Phyllis's hotel room. The words hit Lily like a slap. She tried to mask the shock, but Phyllis, never one to miss an emotional flicker, leaned back and dismissed the question with a sharp remark, claiming Lily's reaction was none of her business. Kane chimed in, unapologetic, asserting that he owed her nothing, not explanations, not regret. The tension escalated quickly. Phyllis accused Lily of acting like a jealous ex, hammering her with the one accusation Lily hated most. That she still wanted Kane, that her irritation was rooted in possessiveness rather than principle. Lily denied it, saying she wasn't jealous, just disappointed, profoundly disappointed in Kane for falling back into destructive patterns and in herself for expecting him to change. Her confession, though quiet, cut deeper than any shout. Kane, suddenly uncomfortable under the weight of the truth, asked to speak to her privately, trying to salvage some dignity from the confrontation. When they stepped aside, he told her he didn't need her judgment anymore, that he was tired of being lectured every time their paths crossed. Lily held his gaze, trying to reconcile the man standing before her with the one she once believed he could become. She felt a sadness settle in her chest, not because she still loved him, but because she realized she no longer recognized him at all. The entire night unfolded like a mirror of every unresolved wound in their shared past. Misplaced trust, unmet expectations, emotional residue that neither of them had addressed. Kane felt accused, cornered, and defensive, while Lily felt betrayed, exhausted, and strangely liberated. Meanwhile Phyllis, watching from a distance, wore an expression that mixed triumph with insecurity, as though she had won a battle she never meant to start but was determined to finish. Her need to assert dominance over Lily, to claim Kane as some kind of victory, revealed her own buried wounds. She despised being underestimated, dismissed, or replaced. Lily represented everything Phyllis could never fully control: poise, empathy, restraint, and that made her itching to strike. And still, beneath all of this, the unseen threads continued weaving the characters together. Lily's decision to push Holden out of town was rooted in protection, yet Claire's budding attachment to him threatened to ignite a new layer of conflict. Phyllis's suspicions about Kane and her laptop hinted at secrets she wasn't ready to reveal. Nikki's worry for Claire exposed a generational fear that the younger Newman might repeat old mistakes. Audra's shadow lingered over Claire's every emotional choice. And Kane and Lily, despite their insistence on distance, remained bound by a complicated history neither could fully sever. Genoa City thrived on these fractures, the cracks where weaknesses met desire, where fear clashed with ambition, and where every choice, no matter how small, had the power to shift alliances, rekindle grudges, or reignite forgotten passions. The night ended without resolution, but in true Young and the Restless fashion, the emotional debris left behind promised that each character would soon face consequences they had not yet imagined. Each of them standing at the threshold of decisions that could either heal old wounds or tear open entirely new ones. The emotional tension in Genoa City only deepened as the night wore on, and Lily Winters found herself standing across from Kane Ashby, his expression caught somewhere between regret and defiance. When he told her, in that familiar low tone, that it wasn't what she thought and that he simply needed a little time in the place he was staying, Lily felt a raw ache rise inside her. It was almost ironic, laughable, even, because asking for time and space was exactly what she had asked of him in the message she left earlier. Hearing him echo it back now, as if it were his idea or an inconvenience forced upon him, struck her with a sharp, weary sadness. Kane, oblivious to the depth of that reaction, asked if they could have breakfast together and talk things through, but Lily, with a calmness he didn't expect, glanced toward Phyllis and said she was busy. The dismissal was quiet but cutting, a refusal that made Kane's posture stiffen. His pride bruised, he muttered that she was wasting his time anyway and walked out with Phyllis, the two of them leaving a trail of unresolved tension in their wake. Lily remained still for a moment, swallowing the complicated mix of frustration and liberation tightening in her chest before she moved toward the bar, hoping to steady herself with a moment of solitude. But solitude was not what awaited her. Holden Novak appeared almost immediately, as if summoned by the gravity of conflict, and Lily felt her stomach tighten the moment she saw him approach. She bristled as he offered a too familiar smile, asking whether she was upset and whether she thought he still worked for Kane. She cut through his attempt at small talk with the precision of someone who had no patience left, telling him that she assumed he was still employed. When she asked what he actually did for Kane, Holden straightened with a faint air of pride, saying he managed Kane's properties. Lily nodded slowly, the corners of her expression sharpening as she delivered her clipped reply, "For now." Holden paused, unsettled, and asked what she meant, only for Lily to tell him that Arabesque, the property he was helping Kane oversee, was collapsing financially and structurally, destined for demolition or bankruptcy. She advised him, with cool detachment, that if she were in his position, she would seriously consider returning to Los Angeles and securing another job before his current one evaporated beneath him. Holden's composure cracked for a moment as Lily walked away, her confidence and clarity leaving him more shaken than he wanted to admit. Almost immediately, Audra Charles entered the room with the timing of someone who instinctively sought out vulnerability. Spotting Holden, she let out a satisfied hum, remarking that it looked like someone had just received terrible news, and that she couldn't think of anyone who deserved it more. Holden tensed, told her not to start, but Audra's smirk carried a wicked amusement. She mentioned Claire, hinting that Claire wouldn't be quite so sweet on him if she knew everything. That struck a nerve, and Holden's voice lowered sharply as he told her not to provoke Claire again, warning her that they both had far too much to lose if the rest of the story ever came out. His words, the kind spoken by a man hiding something volatile, momentarily wiped the smirk from Audra's face. She nodded, but her agreement was only surface deep. She left for the women's restroom, slipping away with the same elegance she used to disarm boardrooms and break hearts. Holden watched her go, tension gripping his shoulders. What he didn't see was Claire arriving a moment later. Claire paused at the doorway, her heart performing the kind of uneasy flutter she had long associated with Holden. Their connection had been unexpected, almost surreal, beginning the night he introduced her to the Vespers ceremony, a mysterious ritual she still didn't fully understand but remembered with a strange fondness. She allowed herself a small smile as the memory flickered through her mind, warming her despite the cold uncertainty that had followed. But the warmth vanished when she spotted Audra returning from the restroom, walking directly toward Holden. Claire watched with increasing fury as Audra leaned in too closely, spoke too casually, and behaved with the entitled confidence of a woman who believed she owned everyone she touched. Claire felt something hot and sharp break loose inside her. She muttered under her breath, wondering why that bitch could never stay out of her life, why every time Claire tried to find something good, Audra appeared like a curse determined to ruin it. Her jaw tightened as she reached for her phone, her anger simmering into something more dangerous, confusion woven with jealousy, fear braided with resentment. Claire had fought too long to regain control of her identity, only to watch someone like Audra waltz back into her orbit with poisonous familiarity. She didn't know yet what she would do or what message she would send, but she understood one thing with chilling clarity: Audra Charles had crossed an invisible line the moment she stepped back toward Holden, and Claire wasn't going to let it pass quietly this time. Claire stood frozen in the softly lit entryway of the bar, the noise of clinking glasses and muted conversation fading behind the roaring sound of her own pulse. Watching Audra lean toward Holden with that smug, knowing smile made something inside her fracture, not just with jealousy but with the deep, bone-level fear that her choices were starting to spiral beyond her grasp. Every time she opened herself to someone, every time she let her guard down, someone, usually Audra, would take advantage of the cracks. She felt the bitter taste of betrayal spreading across her tongue, even though Holden hadn't technically done anything wrong, at least not that she knew of. What unsettled Claire most was the possibility that she didn't know him at all, that Audra's presence and Holden's evasiveness were not coincidences but warning signs she had been too naive to interpret. And so she stood there, clutching her phone as if it were a lifeline, aware that one wrong message, sent in anger, sent in heartbreak, could ignite consequences she could never undo. Holden, unaware that Claire had arrived, finally gathered himself and stepped outside for air, the night pressing cool against his skin. He replayed Lily's words in his mind, irritation and anxiety knotted together as he considered the possibility that his job truly was in jeopardy. He had always been good at improvising, at moving from opportunity to opportunity without fully committing to anything or anyone, but the truth was that Kane's financial decline placed Holden in a vulnerable position he couldn't afford. There were too many secrets, too many loose threads connecting him to people who didn't trust each other, and the wrong revelation could trap him in a conflict that would not end well. As he leaned against the railing of the patio, he caught sight of Claire through the window and felt a pang of something unfamiliar, guilt mixed with longing. He wanted to be the kind of person she believed him to be, but Audra's presence reminded him he wasn't. Inside, Audra reapplied her lipstick with slow, deliberate strokes in the restroom mirror, studying her reflection like a strategist analyzing her facade before returning to battle. She had accepted Holden's warning but not his authority. No man who relied on her secrets would ever control her actions. If anything, his desperation only heightened her interest. She thrived where chaos simmered beneath the surface, where people scrambled to hide their mistakes. Stepping out of the restroom, she spotted Claire still near the entrance and noted the tension etched across her face. Audra's lips curled with satisfaction. Few things pleased her more than discovering she had struck a nerve without even trying. She approached with calculated innocence, glancing around as if expecting someone else to appear. But Claire's icy stare made her stop mid-step, sensing danger but unwilling to admit it. Claire wasn't sure whether to confront Audra or Holden first, but the decision was abruptly made for her when Holden re-entered the bar and caught her eye. He felt the anxiety spike in his chest when he saw her expression. A mix of wounded pride and controlled fury. He approached cautiously, trying to read the situation, but she stepped back slightly, forcing him to slow down. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them felt heavier than words. Holden subtly reached for her arm, trying to close the physical distance, but Claire lifted her chin, signaling she needed answers more than comfort. She remembered the night Holden introduced her to Vespers, a mysterious and intimate ritual that had made her feel chosen, special. Now that memory twisted painfully as she wondered whether Audra had been part of the same world, whether Holden had offered others the same experiences he claimed were unique to her. The idea that she wasn't special, just another temporary amusement, cut deeper than she wanted to admit. Holden sensed her spiraling thoughts, though he couldn't guess the full extent. He tried to explain that running into Audra was unexpected, that nothing meaningful had passed between them, but Claire couldn't shake the feeling of danger. Something about Audra always felt like a warning disguised as a smile. Claire's own childhood trauma, the manipulation, the lies, the promises that turned out to be traps, had taught her to listen to her instincts, and right now every instinct screamed that Audra was involved in something bigger than any of them knew. Holden hesitated, torn between reassuring Claire and protecting his own secrets, and that hesitation revealed more than any confession could. Claire saw it and felt her chest tighten with dread. She realized that Holden was holding back, and the depth of that silence terrified her. Meanwhile, across town, Lily sat in her car outside Society, her hands gripping the steering wheel as she replayed her earlier confrontation with Kane. She had walked out with dignity, strength even, but the conversation continued to echo in her mind with a lingering bitterness she couldn't shake. The way Kane had dismissed her feelings, the way Phyllis had smirked and inserted herself into the moment, it left Lily feeling drained, almost hollow. Holden's uninvited intrusion only made the night worse. She wondered why people like Holden and Kane always seemed to orbit her life at the worst possible times, dragging their unresolved issues into her path. She knew she needed to center herself, to reclaim her boundaries, but it felt like every attempt brought a new wave of chaos. Still, she took a deep breath and reminded herself that she had survived worse, and she would survive this, too. Back at the bar, Audra's gaze flicked from Claire to Holden and back again, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. The tension pleased her, feeding her ego, but she also understood that Holden's earlier warning had merit. Their shared secret, the one linking them through questionable choices and risky alliances, was still buried, but only barely. Claire's fingers tightened around her phone, the simmering fury inside her sharpening into purpose as she stepped into a quiet corner of the bar and dialed Billy Abbott. There was something coldly liberating about the decision, perhaps because Billy was one of the few people in Genoa City who despised Audra Charles as much as she did, one of the few who understood the depth of the damage Audra could inflict when left unchecked. When he didn't answer, she typed the message instead, her thumb moving quickly over the screen. "I have information about Audra Charles you'll want to hear." She hesitated only a moment before adding the second line, "Meet me, both you and Sally. Tomorrow morning. It's important." As she hit send, she felt a shiver run down her spine, a mix of adrenaline and fear, because involving Billy meant crossing a threshold she couldn't step back from. Billy Abbott never handled information quietly. And Sally Spectra, whose life Audra had already upended more than once, would not greet this meeting with calm restraint. Claire knew she was lighting a fuse, but something inside her craved the explosion. If Audra insisted on tearing at the fragile peace Claire was building, then Claire would strike back with equal force. Across town, the night carried a different kind of tension as Phyllis and Kane arrived at Crimson Lights, an uneasy pairing illuminated by the warm glow of the coffeehouse lights. Their dynamic was as unpredictable as ever, half flirtation, half suspicion, and entirely fueled by impulses neither fully trusted. Kane dropped into the seat across from Phyllis with the confidence of a man prepared to justify every questionable decision he had made. He looked at her with a frankness that bordered on arrogance and told her he didn't regret their night together, that he had wanted her then and wanted her still. His voice carried that low, intimate tone he used when he wanted to disarm her, and for a moment, Phyllis allowed herself to feel the familiar thrill of being desired. But then he added that he wanted to hear everything she thought, all of it, and she leaned back, crossing her arms with a slow, deliberate smile. "Everything?" she repeated, the word curling with suspicion. "Like what my laptop password is?" Kane stiffened at the implication, and for the first time that night, the easy charm he had been wearing began to crack. He tried to turn the accusation into a joke, claiming he thought snooping might prove she was the software thief people suspected. But Phyllis wasn't buying it. Her eyes narrowed, sharp and calculating, as she reminded him that she had left him alone in her room long enough to take a shower. And that she knew exactly what a man like Kane would think to do with that kind of opportunity. "Did you sleep with me just to get my hard drive?" she demanded, her voice low but packed with volatile emotion. The accusation hung in the air between them like a blade suspended by a thread. Kane leaned forward, his expression shifting from defensive to wounded, insisting that he wanted her just as much as she wanted him, that their night together wasn't manipulation but mutual desire. He said it with enough conviction to make her pause, but Phyllis Summers was no stranger to lies packaged as passion. She watched him carefully, searching his face for the truth, and found only a man torn between craving and self-preservation. She knew Kane had secrets. She also knew men like him only told the truth when it benefited them. The question was whether desire had ever been his priority, or whether she had simply been a means to an end. As the conversation deepened, the tension between them thickened into something more volatile than romantic. Phyllis dragged her nail along the rim of her cup, studying Kane with the kind of intensity that made him squirm. She thought about how easily he had fallen back into her bed, how quickly he had turned defensive when she asked pointed questions, and how coincidentally convenient his arrival had been at this exact moment in her career. She couldn't shake the nagging suspicion that Kane's renewed interest had nothing to do with desire and everything to do with desperation, desperation tied to arabesque, to Holden, to financial collapse, and to secrets Kane was terrified Lily or Billy might uncover. Meanwhile, Claire's message to Billy pulsed like a spark traveling toward Tinder. Billy sat in his office at Chancellor Winters, staring at the notification on his phone with widening suspicion. Information about Audra Charles was enough to make him sit up straighter, but the request to bring Sally Spectra turned that suspicion into full alert. Sally, tangled in her own web of ambition and reinvention, read the forwarded message minutes later and felt her heartbeat quicken. Audra Charles was a name that haunted her career and her personal life more times than she wanted to count. The idea that Claire had something significant enough to demand a joint meeting meant only one thing. Whatever Audra was hiding had the potential to destroy far more than reputations. And in a dark irony, as Claire left society, still trembling from the storm inside her, Audra herself stepped onto the sidewalk with a look of irritation, confusion, and something she refused to name: the fear. She had seen Claire make the call. She had seen the shift in Claire's expression, the sharp exhale, the set jaw. Audra sensed that Claire was about to become a problem in ways she had not anticipated. She hated problems she didn't control. And Claire Grace, traumatized, volatile, rebuilding, unpredictable, was exactly the kind of threat Audra had underestimated before and vowed never to underestimate again. Holden, caught between his two disasters, Audra's manipulations and Claire's instability, found himself spiraling in a direction he could no longer manage. He knew Claire's trust was slipping. He knew Audra's presence had pushed her closer to an edge she didn't deserve to stand on. And yet he could not fully sever ties with either woman, each one holding a piece of his past he could not afford to expose. Back at Crimson Lights, Kane reached across the table as if trying to salvage what remained of the night, insisting again that sleeping with Phyllis was mutual, not calculated. But Phyllis leaned back with a slow, knowing smile, the kind that had unnerved men far stronger than Kane Ashby. She didn't say it out loud, not yet, but the truth was forming in her mind as clearly as if she had spoken it: Kane wanted something from her. And whether it was her laptop, her loyalties, or her silence, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She wasn't done playing. But she would be the one controlling the game.